The rain beats heavily against the windows. It's dark and scary outside. Taeyong sits alone in his big house. He looks at the papers. This is his job. Numbers, tables, reports. It's very late, but he's still working. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. It's the intercom at the gate. The sound is loud and harsh. It cuts through the silence. Taeyong looks up. Who is it? No one called, no one warned. The bell stops ringing. Once again, all that's heard is the rain. But then the knocking begins. They're knocking not at the gate anymore, but directly at the front door of the house. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking isn't loud, but it's insistent, as if whoever's knocking has almost no strength left. Taeyong gets up from his desk. He's in no hurry. He walks from the office to the hallway. It's dark there. He doesn't turn on the light. He approaches the door and listens. Through the sound of the rain, he hears rapid breathing. Someone is breathing heavily behind the door. Maybe they're crying. Taeyong silently pulls back the heavy bolts. He opens the door. A girl stands in the doorway. She's soaking wet. It looks like she just came out of the river. Her light jacket is darkened by the water and clings to her shoulders. Her jeans cling to her legs. Streams of water run down her short black curls. Water runs down her face. She's shaking. A fine shiver, as if she's feverish. She squints against the light from the house. Then she quickly turns and looks back into the blackness of the garden. She looks as if she expects something terrible to emerge from the darkness. Her eyes are wide with fear. Help! She breathes out. Her voice is hoarse and strained. Please, she adds, almost in a whisper. She takes a small step forward. Heavy drops fall from her clothes onto the clean floor, forming a wet spot. My name is Chidi, the girl says, as if remembering to introduce herself. She gulps again. There was someone following me from the station. I walked, and they followed me. I ran, and they ran after me. I was so scared. I just ran without looking back. And then I saw these gates. They were lit up, and I ran to them. I didn't know where else to go. She speaks quickly, choppily. Her words are jumbled. She glances at Taeyong's face, then back into the darkness behind her. There's pure panic in her eyes. She's waiting for his reaction, waiting for him to say something. She hopes for help, yet fears he'll slam the door in her face. Taeyong is silent. He doesn't move. He stands in the doorway and looks at her. He sees her young face. He sees her hands shaking. He sees the real animal terror in her eyes. This isn't an act. She's really in trouble. He looks at her for several long seconds. The rain continues to fall behind him. Then, without a word, Taeyong takes a step back. He simply retreats deeper into the hallway. He doesn't beckon her with his hand. He doesn't smile. He simply makes way. The door is now open. Between them, there's only empty space and the light from the house. It's a silent permission to enter. Chidi freezes for a second. She didn't expect him to simply retreat. She expected questions, suspicion, maybe even a shout, but not this quiet command. Her gaze darts once more from his motionless face to the darkness beyond the door. There, in the wet blackness of the garden, her pursuer could still be close. But here, dry, warm, and a strange, silent man. She steps over the threshold, her wet sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. She turns and pushes the heavy door. The oak slams into place with a dull thud, cutting off the sound of the rain and the horror lingering outside. The click of the lock resonates louder than any words. She stands in the middle of the huge hallway, unsure of what to do. She simply stands there, shivering. Water drips from her clothes onto the floor, forming a dark, wet spot around her feet. She looks at him, embarrassed, then looks up at Taeyong. He's already turned his back on her and is heading back into the study, where the light is pouring in. Chidi doesn't move. She's afraid to take another step and get something else dirty. The inside of the house looks like a picture from a magazine. Everything is perfect, clean, nothing out of place, not a speck of dust. And here she is, all wet and dirty. She hears Taeyong doing something in the office. The sound of a closet opening, footsteps. He returns. In his hands is a folded dark gray robe made of thick, soft fabric. He approaches her and simply holds it out. He doesn't place it in her hands, but holds it, waiting for her to take it. Take off the wet stuff, he says in the same even, emotionless voice. It's warm here. His tone leaves no choice. It's not a request. It's a statement of fact. You're wet. It's warm here. Change. Chidi silently takes the robe. The fabric is unexpectedly pleasant to the touch, heavy and warm. He points his chin to the corner of the room. There stands a tall wooden screen with a dark pattern. You can change there. Then he walks over to a large leather chair against the wall and places a small towel, which she hadn't noticed at first, on the back of it. He does all this silently, as if he were performing a boring but necessary task. Then he returns to his desk in the office and sits down. He picks up the papers again, as if nothing had happened, as if there wasn't a wet stranger standing in his house. Chidi looks at his back. then at the screen. She slowly moves behind it. Her fingers are numb from the cold, and she has difficulty unzipping her jacket. The clothes are stuck to her body, and she has to literally tear them away. She tries to do everything as quietly as possible. She peels off her wet jeans, jacket, and t-shirt. She carefully, though her hands are shaking, hangs them all over the back of a chair behind the screen. She dries herself with a rough but dry towel. It smells clean. Then she puts on a robe. It's huge on her. The sleeves are too long. She has to roll them up several times. She ties the belt twice. The fabric softly envelops her, and gradually, the terrible shivering begins to subside. There's no trace left of the cold that had been deep inside, only weakness and embarrassment. She peers cautiously out from behind the screen. Taeyong is still sitting at the table, writing something on a document. The lamplight falls only on his hands and the papers. His face is in semi-darkness. Chidi steps out, her bare feet hitting the cold marble. She approaches the edge of the office, but doesn't go inside. She pauses in the doorway. I don't know how to thank you, she says quietly. Her voice sounds a little more confident, but still timid. Thank you. I'll leave in the morning, honestly, as soon as it's light. Taeyong doesn't even look up at her. He continues writing. After a few seconds, he simply raises his hand and makes a gentle sweep of his wrist, as if swatting away a pesky fly. The gesture means, leave it, never mind, forget it. It doesn't matter, he finally says, still staring at the papers. There are free rooms in the right wing, 3 or 4. The doors are unlocked. He pauses for a second to run his hand over his face, and then looks back at the report. Choose anyone, and go to bed. He points with his pen somewhere deep into the house. The bathroom is there, in the common hallway. Clean linens are in the closets. Take what you need. He pauses, then adds, his voice a little more distant, as if he's already mentally returned to his numbers. I'll be busy until the morning. Don't disturb me. And that's it. He immerses himself in his work again. The conversation is over. For him, the situation is resolved. He let her in, gave her dry clothes, and a place to sleep. The rest is none of his business. Chidi stands and looks at him. She feels like she needs to say something else. Thank you again. Apologize for bothering her, but the words stick in her throat. In his presence, in the silence filled only with the rustle of paper, all words seem superfluous and loud. She simply nods quietly, though he can't see her. Then she turns and walks in the direction he pointed, her bare feet slapping the floor. The hallway is long and dimly lit. The walls are smooth and bright. No paintings, no photographs. It feels like an expensive but soulless hotel. She reaches a fork in the road. To the right is a dark corridor, the very same right wing. To the left is another passage, at the end of which a door stands ajar. Soft light pours from within. Without thinking, almost automatically, because she's tired and just wants to lie down, Chidi turns left instead of right, toward the light. A simple instinct guides her. Danger can lurk in the darkness, and light signifies safety. She approaches the slightly open door and peers inside. It's a bedroom, large, spacious. In the center is a huge bed with a dark bedspread. A lamp with a dim shade burns on the nightstand. The room smells of something clean, barely perceptible, like a forest after rain. It doesn't smell like the guest rooms. There's a constant presence here, but Chidi is too exhausted to analyze it. She thinks this must be one of those spare rooms. The better one. She enters, closes the door behind her, and, without turning on any more lights, approaches the bed. She throws off her enormous robe, and it falls in a soft heap to the floor. The room is warm. She crawls under the heavy, cool bedspread, burying her face in the enormous pillow. The scent of this clean linen, this semi-darkness, this silence, all of it envelops her like a cocoon. Her eyes close of their own accord. In a second, literally in a single breath, she falls into a deep, restless sleep, forgetting the rain, the chase, and the strange owner of the house. For her, at that moment, all the rooms in this huge alien house were the same. They were all alien, cold, faceless, and this one was no exception. It was just less dark and had a bed that looked incredibly soft and inviting. She entered and closed the door behind her. The soft click of the lock completely cut her off from the rest of the house. Now it was just her and the silence. She sighed heavily. Finally, she could stop. No more running, no more fear, no more thinking. She pulled off her enormous robe. The warm fabric slid off her shoulders and fell to the floor in a soft circle around her feet. She didn't even think to pick it up. Wearing only a long t-shirt, which she had taken from the closet behind the screen, she approached the bed. She ran her hand over the bedspread. The material was cool and silky under her fingers. She pulled back the edge of the covers and lay down. The coolness of the sheets was so pleasant after all the heat of fear and running. She buried her face in the pillow. The pillow smelled like the room, clean and with that light, elusive, woodsy scent. The scent was strangely soothing. She rolled onto her side, pulled her knees up to her chest, as she always did when she slept alone, and pulled the covers over her. Thoughts in her head that whole, the eyes, spinning like crazy, now simply blurred. They turned into incoherent images. A dark street, the reflection of streetlights in puddles, the sound of strangers' footsteps, the bright light of a gate, a man's face in the doorway, serious and unreadable. All of this mixed and dissolved. Her breathing became deep and even. The tense muscles of her face relaxed. The hand clenched into a fist beneath her pillow unclenched. She didn't toss and turn, didn't search for a comfortable position. She simply went limp and sank into a deep, black pit of sleep where there was no rain, no pursuers, no unfamiliar houses. It was a dream of utter exhaustion, a dream of flight that was finally over. She didn't hear the rain gradually subsiding outside. She didn't hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the room. She slept soundly, motionless, completely surrendered to this long-awaited peace. The room, the house, its owner, all ceased to exist. There was only the soft bed, the warm blanket, and the abyss of sleep that covered her completely. Taeyong finished his last report as the gray pre-dawn light began to filter through the rain clouds. He wrote the final period on the document, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. His eyes burned with fatigue, his temples pounded. He stretched, and the bones in his back creaked from the prolonged immobility. He gathered all the papers into a neat stack and placed them in the safe. Then he turned off the computer and desk lamp. The office was plunged into semi-darkness. He stood and stretched slowly. His entire figure expressed a dull, accumulated fatigue. His mind was already reeling over the morning's plan. Calls that needed to be made first thing. Meetings that couldn't be postponed. His thoughts were heavy and businesslike. He walked out of the office into the dark hallway. The house was plunged into complete, deathly silence. Even the rain had stopped. Taeyong walked habitually down the hallway to his bedroom. His feet carried him along the familiar route. He didn't even look around. His mind was already there, in bed, in the few short hours of sleep he could afford. He approached his bedroom door. It was closed. He was slightly surprised. He never closed it when he was home alone, perhaps because of a draft. Without thinking, almost automatically, he turned the handle and pushed the door, simultaneously flicking the light switch by the entrance. A bright light from the ceiling flooded the room, and Taeyong froze, his hand still resting on the switch. On his bed, on his side, under his blanket, a girl slept. That same Chidi. She lay on her side, curled up like a small animal. Her dark hair was disheveled across the pillow. One hand was under her cheek, the other clenched into a weak fist and pressed to her chest. She took up so little space on the enormous bed that it seemed she was afraid to disturb even the air around her. She was breathing deeply and evenly. The outline of her frail body, clad only in a t-shirt, was visible under the blanket. On the floor, next to the bed, his robe lay in a shapeless heap. Taeyong stood and watched. Not a muscle on his face moved, but inside, everything stopped for a moment. Surprise? Yes, but not anger. More like bewilderment. Deep, almost absurd bewilderment. He said clearly, "In the right wing." He pointed. How could she have been so mistaken? Had she intentionally? No. The look at her sleeping, defenseless face erased any thoughts of intent. It was a mistake. A stupid, childish mistake made by a frightened person. He let out a quiet, strangled sigh. The sound came out more like a groan of weariness than an expression of emotion. What to do now? Options raced through his head with cold speed. Option 1. Wake her. Explain she wasn't there. Take her to another room. That would be the right thing to do, the logical thing to do. But that would mean a scene. Fright, apologies, fuss. He was dead tired. He needed sleep. She, apparently, needed it too. Option 2. Leave it as is. Go sleep in the guest room himself. But this was his home, his bed. Going somewhere because of some stranger's mistake that went against his very nature. It would be a weakness he wasn't prepared for. Option 3. He looked at her again. She hadn't moved. She slept so soundly, it seemed you couldn't wake her, even with a cannon. She didn't snore, didn't toss and turn. She just slept, quietly. He looked at the empty half of the bed. It was enormous. Larger than a standard bunk bed. 2 more people could have slept between them, and they wouldn't have touched. Pragmatism, his fundamental and unchanging principle, took precedence. Waking her would be a waste of time and energy. Leaving would be an illogical concession. The simplest and most effective option remained. He'd already wasted time on her. letting her in and giving her clothes. Now she shouldn't disturb his sleep. He flicked the switch. The overhead light went out, and the room was plunged into semi-darkness once again, illuminated only by the dim nightlight on his nightstand. He approached the bed. His movements were quiet, but not stealthy. He simply saw no need to make noise. He walked around the bed to his side. His side. He took off his jacket and hung it over the back of a chair. He unbuttoned and removed his shirt, throwing it in the laundry basket in the corner. He was left wearing dark pants and a t-shirt. He pulled back the blanket on his side and lay down. The mattress didn't even budge under his weight. It was expensive, orthopedic, designed not to disturb the person lying next to it. Taeyong settled onto his back, his hands on his chest. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay there, listening to the silence, and in that silence there was now a new sound, her breathing, even, deep. He listened. Yes, she really wasn't snoring. She wasn't mumbling in her sleep. She was just breathing. It was a peaceful sound. He lay there, pondering the strangeness of the situation. A complete stranger was sleeping in his bed, in his house. He knew nothing about her except her name, and the fact that someone was chasing her. It was a glaring, unimaginable breach of security. Stupid, but somehow now in the darkness, it didn't cause alarm, only weary bewilderment. He rolled onto his side, his back to her. There was almost a meter of space between them. He closed his eyes again. Gradually, the heaviness in his limbs and the fog in his head began to take their toll. His own breathing evened out and slowed. He was almost asleep when he felt a slight movement behind him. Chidi turned over in her sleep. She didn't do it abruptly, but smoothly, as if seeking warmth. She turned to face his back. Then, after a few minutes, she shifted a little further. Her knee, cool through the thin fabric of her t-shirt, lightly touched his back. Taeyong froze. He wasn't asleep. He was fully aware in that second. He waited to see if she would move away, but she didn't. She simply settled, as if she'd found a comfortable position, and froze again. Her breathing became deep and even, and then something strange happened. Warmth from that light, almost ghostly touch. A warmth began to spread along his back. Not the physical warmth of her skin. It was cool, but something else. A feeling of presence. He hadn't slept next to someone in so long. So long since his room at night had been filled with nothing but silence and his own thoughts. And instead of moving away, as he should have, as logic and his habit of personal space dictated, he simply remained lying there. He closed his eyes. The touch wasn't intrusive. It was casual, childish. There was no intention behind it. It just was. And this warmth, this feeling of another living being nearby, somehow didn't irritate him. On the contrary, it seemed to soften the sharp edge of loneliness that always hung over this enormous bed. It made the silence less oppressive. His thoughts, which just a moment ago had been swirling around morning calls and business problems, began to slowly blur. The tension in his shoulders, which he'd been carrying around like armor, began to ease. Chidi's breathing behind him became a rhythmic, almost hypnotic background. He didn't move. He simply lay there, listening to her breathe, and as he listened, he himself began to drift off to sleep. Not the brief, restless sleep he was accustomed to, ready to wake at any moment, but a deeper, calmer one. His body relaxed in a way it hadn't in months. Just before falling asleep, a last clear thought flashed through his mind. Strange. She's sleeping quietly. And then darkness fell upon him too. The first rays of morning filtered through the cracks in the heavy curtains. The room was filled with a soft gray light. Chidi began to awaken slowly from the depths of the bottomless sleep she had fallen into. First came a feeling of incredible peace and safety. Then came physical sensations. Warmth. A deep, sleepy warmth spread across her back. She lay on her side, pressed against something large and hard. Something that was breathing rhythmically and deeply. Her sleepy brain lazily processed the information. The pillow didn't smell like her perfume. The blanket was too heavy. And that warmth behind her, it wasn't the sun's warmth on the pillow. It was, her eyes flew open. She stood motionless, frozen. Her consciousness slashed into reality, like a knife. She wasn't in her own apartment. She was in someone else's house. She'd fallen into some room. And now there was someone behind her. All the blood drained from her face. Her heart pounded so hard she felt sick. Her left hand was under her head, and her right, she slowly, trembling, lowered it under the blanket. Under the thin fabric of her t-shirt, she felt a hard, warm surface. Not a bed. Someone's back. Someone's back, covered in the thin fabric of a t-shirt. Panic surged through her. hot and blind. She jerked forward, as if struck by electricity. She recoiled to the very edge of the bed, nearly falling off. The blanket flew off her. She sat up, clutching the edge of the sheet, staring wide-eyed at the man lying next to her. Taeyong, the master of the house. He lay on his side, his back to her, and now he slowly turned. His movements were calm, not jerky, as if he were simply turning over in his sleep. He opened his eyes, and there was not a drop of sleep in them. They were clear, cool, and completely aware. He woke instantly and completely, as if he had never slept. "What is this?" Chidi blurted out. Her voice broke into a shrill whisper. "What are you doing?" She stumbled back even further, her back hitting the headboard. Her face burned with a mixture of shame and horror. She pulled the blanket toward her, using it as a shield. Her hands were shaking. Taeyong sat up slowly on the bed. He didn't try to approach her. He simply sat there, turned toward her, his face perfectly calm in the soft morning light. He looked at her as if studying a rare, slightly grotesque insect. "Calm down," he said. His voice was low, even, without a hint of emotion. It sounded the same as it had last night. "You're in my bed, in my bedroom." He said it simply, as if he were stating the weather outside. No accusation, no anger, just a fact. The words didn't hit Chidi right away. At first, she simply stared at him, catching her breath. Then her gaze, wild and frightened, darted around the room. For the first time, she truly saw it, not as a dark refuge, but as an alien space. On the nightstand next to him lay a men's watch with a steel bracelet. Expensive, heavy. Next to it lay a folder of papers. His jacket, the very one he'd been wearing yesterday, hung over the back of the chair by the window. On the floor next to her lay his robe, and on the bathroom door, which was ajar, hung a man's robe made of a dark towel. A wave of understanding washed over her. A hot, humiliating shame flooded her entire body. She turned her gaze back to him, to his calm, tired face, to his waiting gaze. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her voice was almost gone. I... She covered her face with her hands, but immediately pulled them back, as if she'd been burned. "I got it wrong. I'm so sorry." The word sorry in English blurted out on its own, out of panic. "I didn't mean to. I thought this was a spare room. You said to the right, and I went toward the light." She spoke in a jumbled, halting voice, her words overlapping. She couldn't bear his gaze. She threw back the covers and practically rolled off the bed, tripping over his robe on the floor. She bent down, grabbed it, and pulled it over herself, wrapping herself as tightly as she could, trying to hide both her clothes and her embarrassment beneath it. "I'm leaving now," she babbled, backing towards the door. "Thank you for letting me stay overnight. Sorry to bother you. I won't do it again." She had already turned toward the door, her hand reaching for the handle, ready to leap out and run. Run anywhere, just to escape this terrible shame. She felt like a complete fool. She'd broken into a stranger's house, gotten the rooms mixed up, slept the whole night in his bed. She wanted to disappear into the ground. She had almost opened the door when his voice came from behind her, still as even and quiet as ever. But now there was a new note in it. Not anger, not mockery, something else. "Stop!" One word, a quiet, yet incredibly firm sound. It hung in the morning silence of the room, like a stone dropped into still water. Chidi froze, her hand on the doorknob. Her back tensed, fragments of thoughts flashed through her head. He's changed his mind. He's angry. It's about to start. She turned around slowly, as if afraid to scare off a predator. Taeyong didn't move. He still sat on the edge of the bed. The morning light, falling through a crack in the curtains, illuminated his face. It didn't look angry. It was thoughtful. His gaze was intense, searching. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. He saw not a frightened runaway, but something else. Several seconds of silence passed. Chidi held her breath. She waited. Taeyong leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor, then looked up at her again. "You sleep quietly," he said finally. His voice was still even, devoid of intonation. It didn't sound like a compliment, more like a conclusion, an observation. "You don't disturb me. You don't toss and turn. You don't snore." He paused briefly, as if checking the accuracy of his words. Chidi stood there, unable to move. She didn't understand where he was leading. She wanted to disappear into the floor. "With you, it was fine," he continued, and there was something strange in those simple words. Almost approval? In his world, where everything was judged by its usefulness and the absence of problems, fine was the highest praise. Chidi just stared at him, her eyes wide. Her brain refused to process the words. After all this shame, after all this panic, he was talking about how she slept? "What?" she blurted out. She didn't understand at all. Taeyong sighed, a hint of irritation flickering in his eyes. He seemed to dislike repeating what he considered obvious things. "You heard! It didn't bother you. It didn't bother me either, he clarified, as if explaining things to a child. He rose from the bed. He was tall, and in the morning light, in a simple t-shirt and trousers, he seemed even larger, even more monumental. He didn't approach her. He walked to the window and slightly parted the curtains, looking out onto the rain-drenched garden. His profile was sharp and focused. "You can stay here," he said out the window, not looking at her. He said it as simply as he might have said, "Tea's on the table." Chidi blinked, the words reaching her mind with a delay, like an echo. "In this room," he continued, turning to her. His gaze was direct, businesslike. "For good, if you want." Silence fell over the room. Chidi stared at him, not believing her ears. She expected a trick, a taunt, an explanation like, "Just kidding." But his face was completely serious. He wasn't smiling. He was offering. The same way he'd offered a robe and a place to sleep, pragmatically, without emotion. Are you suggesting that I live here?" She finally squeezed out. "With you? In the same room?" Taeyong frowned slightly, as if the question was stupid. "In the same room, yes. In the same bed," he clarified. "You're already here. And nothing bad happened." For him, it was pure logic. She was already here. She wasn't annoying. She was sleeping peacefully, so she could stay. It was that simple. "But why?" Chidi asked, her voice shaking. She needed some kind of explanation. Any kind. "You don't know me. I just barged in on you yesterday." "You didn't barge in, you asked to come in," he corrected dryly. "And why?" He thought for a second, looking out the window again. "Because it's peaceful with you. This room is too quiet at night. And with you, it's not quiet, but it's not noisy either. Just normal." He turned and looked at her. His gaze was direct and honest. There was not a drop of romance in it, not a hint of anything more. He spoke of sleep, only sleep, about how her presence didn't disturb his peace, and even made it a little better. He wouldn't say that, but he didn't kick her out either. "Is that all?" Chidi whispered. Taeyong replied, "The rest is details. You can say no and leave. The door is open. You can say yes. Then this will be your room too. Your side of the bed. Your rules. Except one. Don't disturb me while I'm working. And don't bring anyone else here." He spoke of the house rules as if they were a lease. Chidi stood, clutching the edges of her robe. Her world, which had just been turned upside down by shame, was now being turned upside down again. She was being offered more than just a place to sleep. She was being offered a home? Strange, cold, with a silent owner, but a roof over her head. Safety. The very safety she had sought yesterday when she fled the dark street. She looked at the door. She could leave, return to her uncomfortable little room in a dangerous neighborhood, to the endless job search, to loneliness, or stay here, in this silence, with this man who seemed to want nothing from her except silence at night. It was the craziest proposal of her life, and the most calm in its form. I need to think," she said finally, her voice weak. Taeyong nodded as if he had expected this. "Think," he said. "Breakfast is in the kitchen. Everything is there. I'll be in the office." And as if that was the end of the conversation, he walked past her, walked out of the room, and headed to another part of the house, leaving her alone among his things, in his room, with his incredible proposal hanging in the air. Chidi slowly sank to the edge of the bed, the same side where she'd slept last night. She looked at the sunlight on the floor. She could smell his cologne on the pillow, and she tried to understand what had just happened. Chidi sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Her gaze darted from the closed hallway door to the slightly open bathroom door. The steady sound of running water drifted from there. Taeyong was showering, washing away the remnants of the night. The sound of the water was so ordinary, so mundane, and it was precisely this ordinariness that made her think that everything that had happened was not a dream. He really was here. He really said what he said. She closed her eyes and remembered last night, the dark street, slick with rain, puddles reflecting the lonely streetlights, and the footsteps, clear, quick, persistent footsteps behind her. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Then she tried to walk faster. The footsteps sped up too. Then she ran, and then they ran too. It was pure animal terror. She couldn't see their faces. She didn't know who they were. But she knew that if they caught up with her, something very bad would happen. Then she remembered those huge, illuminated gates, her last chance, and that man in the doorway, his cold, unreadable face, his quiet permission to enter. And then that night, she didn't remember falling asleep. She remembered only the feeling of incredible fatigue and deep relief when her body touched the cool sheets. And then, nothing. Not a single dream. Not a single awakening, only a black, bottomless pit of peace. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept so deeply and so carefree. In her apartment, she'd always slept lightly, listening to the sounds from the street, to the creaking of the floorboards in the hallway. But here it was quiet and safe, so safe that she slept through the night without even noticing she wasn't alone. This feeling of safety was so rare and so welcome. It outweighed all the shame and awkwardness of the morning. The sound of running water in the bathroom stopped. A few minutes later, Taeyong emerged. He was already wearing crisp, dark trousers and a white shirt, a jacket slung over his shoulder. His hair was slightly damp. He walked past her without a word, as if she weren't there. He picked up his watch from the nightstand, put it on, and adjusted his cuffs. Then he left the room. She heard his footsteps receding down the hallway. Chidi sighed and stood up. She put on her robe, which was still lying on the floor, and left the room. She wandered around the house until she found the kitchen. It was huge, immaculately clean, and seemed almost unused, but the refrigerator was full of food, neatly organized food items and containers. She found a kettle and made herself some tea. She sat down on a high stool at the huge kitchen island and simply sat there, cupping the cup in her warm hands, looking out the window at the wet garden. About an hour later, Taeyong walked into the kitchen. He was now fully dressed in a business suit. He looked composed, sharp as a blade. He didn't even glance at her. He opened the refrigerator, took out a container of rice and some other food, heated it up in the microwave, sat down across from her, and began eating quickly. He ate silently, focused, glancing at the screen of his phone lying next to him. Chidi sipped her tea in silence. She watched him. His movements were precise, economical, nothing unnecessary. He finished in a few minutes. He pushed his plate away and took a sip of water from his glass. The silence in the kitchen was echoing. She waited for him to say something, anything, but he was just about to get up, and then she couldn't take it anymore. "I haven't decided yet," she said quietly. Taeyong stopped. He looked up at her, his gaze calm and businesslike. "No one's rushing you," he said. "You have time. Today. Tomorrow." He picked up his plate, carried it to the sink, and set it down. Then he returned to the table, but didn't sit down. He leaned against the back of the chair opposite her. "If you decide to stay," he began, his voice as clear and distinct as it had been yesterday when he was giving his instructions, "it will mean nothing. Not for me and not for you. Do you understand?" Chidi nodded, unable to speak. "This won't mean friendship. This won't mean a relationship. Nothing like that. This will be a deal. You get a roof over your head, food, security. I get peace and quiet at night, and you not to bother me during the day. That's all." He spoke as if he was reading the terms of a contract. "Only sleep and silence. There will be nothing more. No conversations unless they are necessary. No questions. You live your life. I live mine. Our lives intersect only here, in the kitchen sometimes, and in that room at night." He looked at her straight. "You need to understand this right now, so there won't be any misunderstandings later. I won't touch you. I won't want anything from you. You're just the person sleeping on the other side of the bed. That's all." Chidi listened, a strange sense of relief mingling with a hint of hurt. He'd laid it all out so clearly, so coldly, but there was honesty in that coldness. No hidden agenda, no traps. What if I want to leave?" she asked. "Then you'll leave," he shrugged. "No one will hold you back. Just say it. That's all." He straightened up, took the phone and jacket from the table. "Think," he repeated his words from the morning. "I'll be back in the evening. Whether you stay here or not is your business." And he left. She heard the front door open and close, then the quiet sound of a car outside the window. Chidi was left alone in the vast, quiet kitchen. She finished her cold tea. His words hung in the air. Only sleep and silence. It was little. Very little. But for her, who had run in panic yesterday at the sound of someone's footsteps, this little felt like the world. It was stability. It was the absence of fear. She stood up, washed her cup and his plate, then slowly walked back to that room. Her room? Not yet. She sat down on the bed and looked around again. Now she saw details. Books on the shelf, all in Korean. Expensive but simple furniture. The lack of personal photographs. This house was a beautiful but empty shell, and Taeyong seemed to be the same. Beautiful, cold, and empty inside. Could she live in such emptiness? In a silence that could sometimes drive her crazy, but then again, what did she have? Noisy, yet lonely evenings in a small apartment? Constant anxiety about tomorrow? Fear when walking down the street at night? She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. She had to decide, before he returned. After the sound of his car engine faded, Chidi sat in the kitchen for a long time. His words hung in the air, clear and irrefutable, as if carved in stone. Only sleep and silence. She felt as if she had been offered not a place to live, but a very specific position. Nighttime companion for sleeping, no responsibilities, no social interaction, no future, the strangest job in the world. To take her mind off things, she decided to explore the house. She already felt like an uninvited guest, so why not become one completely? She left the kitchen and walked down the hallways. The house was truly enormous. On the ground floor, besides the kitchen and Taeyong's study, there was a living room the size of her old apartment, a dining room with a long, empty table, some kind of exercise room that she mistook for a gym, and several other rooms whose purpose she couldn't figure out, all of them empty. Expensive but bland abstract paintings in thin frames hung on the walls. Books in identical bindings lined the shelves, like collector's edition encyclopedias. Not a single photograph, not a single knick-knack, nothing to indicate who lived here. She climbed the wide staircase to the second floor. There was a long hallway with several doors. She opened the first one, the guest room, large with its own bathroom. Everything was spotlessly clean. The sheets were ironed. There weren't even any dents in the pillows. She opened the second one, the same. A third, yet another. They were all exact copies of each other. Sterile, lifeless, like rooms in an expensive hotel waiting for guests who will never come. And then it became clear to her with terrifying clarity. Taeyong was alone here, truly alone. No wife, no children, not even a dog. These empty rooms, this perfect cleanliness, this silence, all of it was a reflection of himself. He lived in this large house, as if in a beautiful, yet completely empty shell. The sense of loneliness emanating from these walls was so strong that Chidi's heart sank. She left the last guest room and slowly made her way downstairs. She entered the living room. There was a large picture window overlooking the garden. She sat down on the enormous dark leather sofa. It was cold and hard, and then she heard silence, real silence. Not the pleasant, cozy silence you get when it's raining outside and you're wrapped in a blanket. This was a different kind of silence, thick, heavy, oppressive, the silence of an abandoned place. The silence in which you could hear your own heartbeat and the rush of blood in your ears. She sat and listened to this silence, and she felt uneasy. How could anyone live like this? Every night? Every day? It was like living in a crypt, a beautiful, expensive one, but a crypt nonetheless. And then she remembered another silence, the silence of last night in his room. Yes, it had been quiet there too, but it wasn't this oppressive emptiness. That silence was filled with his breathing, quiet even, filled with the warmth of another living being sleeping beside her. And with her own deep sleep, that silence didn't oppress. It enveloped her like a blanket. It was safe. That's what he bought when he proposed. Not her, not company. He bought sound, the sound of someone else's breathing in the silence of his lonely fortress. To dilute this unbearable emptiness, which, as she now understood, must drive one crazy, even if you were a very strong and very closed person. The thought was both sad and poignant. This omnipotent, cold man feared the silence in his own home, and he chose her, a random girl from the street, to bring a little life into that silence, even if that life was just a quiet slumber on the other side of the bed. Chidi sat like that for several hours. The day was drawing to a close. Outside, the garden was fading into twilight. The house lighting turned on automatically, soft, unobtrusive. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't search for music. She simply sat and watched the darkness fall and thought. She thought about her fear, about her loneliness, which was different, noisy, disturbing, but no less real. She thought about how she missed the feeling of somewhere untouched, where you can breathe. When it was completely dark outside, she heard the sound of a car pulling up, then the click of a key in the lock, footsteps in the hallway. Taeyong entered the living room. He was still wearing the same suit, but his tie was loosened. He looked tired. He saw her sitting on the sofa in the darkness. He paused for a second. His face was expressionless in the dim light. He didn't ask anything. He didn't say, "Are you still here?" He simply nodded slightly. Yes, as if acknowledging her presence, and walked past, heading for the stairs. His footsteps faded at the top. Chidi sat and listened. She heard the door in his room opening and closing, then the sound of running water in the bathroom, then silence. She was still sitting when he came downstairs again. Now he was wearing simple dark sweatpants and a t-shirt. He walked into the kitchen. After a while, the smell of food heating up reached her. He was eating alone again, silently. She finally got up from the couch. Her legs were numb. She went into the kitchen. He was sitting at the island, eating, his head buried in his tablet. He didn't look at her when she entered. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink. Then she turned to him. "I'm staying," she said quietly. Taeyong looked up from his tablet. He looked at her. His gaze was calm, appraising. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Same rules. In the morning, you'll meet Soyeon. She runs the household. Tell her what you need." And that was it. He looked back down at his tablet, finished eating, awing, carried his plate to the sink, and left the kitchen. A few minutes later, she heard him go upstairs and close the door to his, now, presumably, their room. Chidi stood in the middle of the brightly lit kitchen. She'd just made what might have been the craziest decision of her life, and he reacted as if she'd announced she'd taken milk from the fridge. There was a certain amount of madness in this, but also a certain amount of peace. No scenes, no questions, just the fact. She stayed. She turned off the light in the kitchen and slowly walked upstairs. She stopped in front of the door to his room. Her hand instinctively reached for the handle. She felt strange. Had she knocked? Had she just let herself in? Yesterday she had entered thinking it was a spare room. Today she entered knowing it was his room and that she now had a place of her own. She quietly opened the door and walked in. Only the bedside lamp was on. Taeyong was already lying on his side of the bed, his back to the center. He didn't move, but she realized he wasn't asleep. She took off the robe she'd left over from this morning and carefully settled into her spot on her side of the bed, the same one she'd slept on the night before. She lay on her back and stared at the darkness of the ceiling. Silence filled the room again, but today it was different. It was conscious. They both lay and listened to it, and listened to each other's breathing. Chidi closed her eyes. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how this strange life would unfold. But today, in this silence, under the same blanket, with a silent, mysterious man, she felt safe. And that was enough for now. Chidi heard the sound of running water in his bathroom fade. Silence fell. Then came soft footsteps, the creak of a closet door opening, the soft slap of a hanger. Then silence again, complete. He was probably already in bed. She sat on the huge sofa in the living room, where she had spent almost the entire day. She already had iced tea in her hands. The evening shadows cast long stripes across the polished floor. Inside, everything was calm, strangely calm, as if a calm had set in after a long storm. She stood up. Her feet carried her out of the living room. She walked through the hall and up the stairs to the second floor. The corridor was lit by the soft glow of sconces. She stopped at the door of the first guest room. That morning, an elderly, stern woman named So-yeon, the housekeeper, had shown her this room. "You'll be comfortable here, miss," she said, without a smile. "Everything is clean. The bathroom is through the door." The room was perfect, safe, predictable. Chidi looked at the door. Then she turned her head and looked down the hallway to where his door was. The very door she had spent the previous night behind. She didn't go to the guest room. She went to his door. Her heart began to beat a little faster, but not from fear, from determination. She stepped closer. The door was massive, made of dark wood. She raised her hand and lightly clenched it into a fist. Her fingers trembled. She took a deep breath and knocked. 3 quiet but firm knuckle taps. "May I?" she asked so quietly that she heard her own voice as if from the outside. There was a pause behind the door. Not long, but noticeable. He hadn't expected a knock. She could almost imagine him perhaps putting down his book or simply looking up from the ceiling. Then his voice, even and muffled through the wood. "Come in." Chidi turned the handle and pushed the door. She entered. The room was lit, as it had been the night before, only by the dim glow of the nightlight on his nightstand. Taeyong was already in bed. He wasn't sitting up, not reading. He simply lay on his back, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. When she entered, he turned his head and looked at her. His face was indistinct in the dim light, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her. She paused at the threshold, hesitant to take a step forward. She felt uninvited, again, but this time by choice. She began and stopped. "I was thinking." He didn't say anything. He just waited. "You said rules. Only sleep and silence," she said, as if repeating a spell. "I agree. On these terms." Taeyong nodded slowly. Once. "Okay," he said simply. "But..." Chidi stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. The soft click of the lock rang loud in the silence. "But I want to stay here, in this room, like you suggested." This time he didn't answer right away. He continued to stare at her. His silence stretched on, and Chidi felt a shiver run down her spine. Maybe he'd changed his mind? Maybe it had just been a whim this morning. And now, in the sober evening light, the idea seemed absurd to him. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice low and emotionless. Chidi hugged herself, looking not at him, but somewhere between the bed and the window. "Because I remember sleeping here last night," she said quietly. "It was the best sleep I've had in months. I didn't wake up. I didn't have nightmares. I felt calm." She looked at him. "And today I've been listening to the silence in this house all day. In the other rooms. It's different. It's not like this." She didn't know if he would understand. How could she explain the difference between the empty silence of loneliness and the filled silence of peace? But he seemed to understand. At least, he didn't ask again. He nodded again. Then he pulled back the blanket on her side of the bed. It wasn't an invitation. It was simply an action. A clearing of space. The taxi driver slides the door open. The conductor punches a ticket. "As you say," he said, and looked at the ceiling again. Chidi felt a weight lifted from her soul, and at the same time, a strange emptiness. Everything had been decided so simply. Without emotion, without discussion, she walked over to the bed. The floor where she'd dropped his robe that morning was empty. It had been removed. She was wearing the same simple t-shirt and light pants that Soyeon had given her from her underwear stash. She sat on the edge of the bed, her back to him. Then she lay down, settling herself on the very edge, trying to take up as little space as possible. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and lay on her side, facing the window, her back to him. The room fell silent. But not the oppressive silence she'd encountered earlier in the day. This was the silence of anticipation. A silence in which two strangers adjusted to each other, finding a new balance. Chidi lay with her eyes open. She listened. His breathing was almost inaudible, but she knew he was awake. She felt his presence as a warm, dense spot in the space behind her. A few minutes passed, then an hour. She couldn't sleep. Her body was tense, her mind clear. She thought about lying in the same bed with a man she barely knew. By some strange silent agreement, it was madness. And then she felt movement, not abruptly, very smoothly. Taeyong rolled onto his side. Now he lay with his back to hers. She froze. He didn't touch her. He just turned. And suddenly, his voice, quiet and a little hoarse from stillness, broke the silence. "You're too close to the edge. You'll fall." Chidi didn't respond. She simply slowly, almost imperceptibly, moved a few centimeters toward the center. She was no longer at the very edge. He said nothing more. After a while, his breathing became deep and even. He fell asleep. And only then, listening to that calm sound, feeling the warmth of his body just an arm's length away, did Chidi close her eyes. The tension began to leave her shoulders. Her breathing evened out. She had made her choice. And now, in the darkness, it didn't seem so crazy. It seemed the only right one. Chidi lay motionless, listening to his breathing become more measured and deep. He seemed to fall asleep easily, effortlessly, as if her presence was already familiar, not something he was aware of for the first time. She, however, felt every wrinkle in the sheets, every rustle outside the window. Her own body was a tense string, but gradually, under the hypnotic rhythm of his breathing, the tension began to melt. It left her toes, her clenched jaw, her shoulders pressed to her ears. She took a slow, deep breath, trying to match his tempo. Exhale, inhale again. The thoughts that had been racing through her head like a mad whirlwind began to settle down like tired birds. She thought that this wasn't a dream, that she was really here, that she no longer had that small, noisy apartment with the perpetually dripping faucet, that now she had this huge, quiet room and this half of the bed. Only sleep and silence, his words echoed in her mind. These weren't just terms, this was the essence of their agreement. He didn't want her dinners, conversations, or smiles. He wanted someone breathing next to him in this room at night, for the silence not to be absolute. And she agreed, because what could she give him in return? She was a nobody, a refugee from a rainy street, penniless, without a plan. She could only give this, her quiet presence, her undisturbed sleep. It was the only thing she had of value at that moment. And there was no humiliation in this thought. There was a strange, bitter clarity. She had found her niche, small, strange, but hers. A place where she was needed not for anything, but simply because she existed, because she slept peacefully. Chidi slowly rolled over, now facing the center of the room. In the dim light of the nightlight, she could make out his outline under the blanket. Broad shoulders, dark hair on the pillow. He lay facing away from her, occupying his half of the space with the confidence of a master. She looked at his back and thought about what it must be like to be him, to live in this crypt palace, to return to this silence every evening, to have everything and have nothing. She suddenly felt sorry for him, not in the way one pities the weak, but in the way a lonely person might pity another lonely person, whose loneliness is even deeper and more profound. He stirred in his sleep, muttering something softly in his own language. Chidi held her breath, but he simply rolled over onto his back, and his breathing became even again. She closed her eyes. Now that she'd made her decision, an unexpected peace settled over her. Tomorrow would be a new day. She'd meet So-yeon, who would probably look at her with cold curiosity. She'd make this space her own, as much as the rules allowed. She'd try to keep a low profile, so as not to upset this fragile, strange balance they'd just established. Sleep began to wash over her slowly, like a warm wave. This time, it wasn't a plunge into an abyss of exhaustion like the night before. It was a gentle, gradual descent. Her last conscious thought was that his scent, that clean, woody aroma, would now be the scent of her dreams. And it was a strange new anchor in a world that had recently seemed utterly hostile. She woke up to find the room already light. Sunbeams filtered through the cracks in the thick curtains, casting golden streaks across the floor. She lay on her back, and for a few seconds couldn't figure out where she was. Then her memory returned. She carefully turned her head. His side of the bed was gone. The blanket was neatly made up, the pillow fluffed. He was already up. Chidi listened. From behind the door came faint, distant sounds. Footsteps, perhaps. So-yeon's voice. The day had begun. Her first day under the new rules. She sat up in bed. On the nightstand next to her lay a neatly folded stack of fresh clothes. Plain cotton pants, t-shirts, a soft cardigan, and socks. All neutral colors, all new with tags. Next to them sat a small note, written in a crisp, impersonal hand. Your things, for the house. Was this his handwriting? Or was So-yeon acting on his instructions? It didn't matter. The things were there. A sign that her presence was acknowledged and accommodated. Not as temporary, but as permanent. As permanent as anything could be, according to their agreement. She stood up, grabbed her clothes, and went to the bathroom. She showered, trying to do everything quickly and quietly, like a guest afraid to disturb her host. The clothes fit her well, were soft and comfortable. When she emerged from the bathroom, the room was empty, but no longer felt so foreign. Her pajamas, neatly folded on a chair, became the first personal item in this space. She stepped out into the hallway and slowly made her way downstairs. The kitchen smelled of coffee. So-yeon, wearing a spotless gray apron, was pouring coffee into a thermos. She turned, saw Chidi, and nodded slightly, barely perceptibly. Good morning, miss. Breakfast is on the table. Mr. Taeyong has already left. He said he'd be back late. Her tone was polite but distant. No questions, no smile, just information. Thank you, Chidi said quietly. She sat at the table. A plate of fruit, yogurt, and toast lay before her. Everything was beautifully arranged. She began to eat, feeling So-yeon's calm, scrutinizing gaze on her. The housekeeper finished the coffee, wiped down the already shiny countertop, and, without another word, left the kitchen. Chidi was left alone. She finished her juice and carried the plate to the sink. Then she simply stood by the window, looking out at the well-tended garden. Birds hopped from the branches. The sun dried last year's grass. Everything was peaceful and beautiful. She turned and glanced around the kitchen. Her kitchen? No, his kitchen, but now hers too. In some way, she went to the cupboard and carefully opened it. Dishes, lots of dishes, everything in its place. She picked up the cup she'd used that morning, washed it, and put it on the drying rack. A simple, mundane action, but there was something about it that suggested a sense of habitation, a declaration. I'm here. I'm staying. She sighed and went back to their room. A long, quiet day lay ahead, a day filled with unfamiliar peace and new, strange rules. But for the first time in a long time, she looked forward without fear.